Yeah, we're live, 7:09, and everything is fine as wine and loving all the time. I don't know, something like that. So tonight we're going to talk about tunnel ram cam. So we know that everything's a turbo cam and a blower cam and a nitrous cam, yada yada yada, all that stuff. But is there a tunnel ram cam? And whenever we post a video of something, whether it could be like a Holly high ram on an LS or a big block tunnel ram, like that's the thumbnail that I'm showing, or I've done them, tested tunnel rams, obviously, on small block Chevys as well. Cleveland's, I've done them on small block Fords. Not Hemis, I don't think, and not Dodges specifically, because I haven't done as much testing on those. But almost everything else I've run some kind of tunnel ram on. Now, here's my question to you guys. It's actually, we're going to get into a little bit of an explanation, but is there a tunnel ram cam? In fact, that is going to be our poll. Very sweet and succinct and simple. Okay, is there really a tunnel ram specific cam? And like always, when we're talking about these things, we have to define that, just like we have to define best cam. And that seems to be the issue with a lot of guys that are talking about whatever kind of cam thing that they're talking about. Oh, this is the best for that. I go, okay, well, you have to define that. You have to tell me what you mean by that. And this is the case. So is there a tunnel ram cam? Is there some sort of cam profile that somehow favors a tunnel ram? Here's why I say no. Here's why I say you can run any kind of camshaft you want with a tunnel ram. And then we need to back up. Okay, is there a camshaft that will make your motor that has a tunnel ram perform better? The answer to that is yes. But in my opinion, that's a different question than is there a tunnel ram cam? And I'll tell you what I mean. But Richard, you just contradicted yourself. Yes, and at the same time, a resounding no. And I'll tell you why. The answer to is there a camshaft that will make your tunnel ram, big block or small block or whatever, perform better? The answer is obviously yes. If you have some sort of stock or mild cam and you put a bigger camshaft in it and it makes more power, okay, you've made your tunnel ram combination, I guess, better, if that was your goal. Maybe your goal is idle quality and you made it worse. But let's say that power was your thing and you wanted to make it more powerful. Here's why, even though you've put a camshaft in there that made your tunnel ram combination more powerful, why, in my opinion, that's not a tunnel ram specific cam. Because if we would have had any other induction system on there, if we had an IR manifold, a dual plane, a single plane, whatever else, anything, a cross ram, dual quad, whatever you want on there. If we would have had any other induction system on there and we did that exact cam change between the lesser cam and the quote tunnel ram cam that made our tunnel ram combination better, would it have also made the combination with those other induction systems also better? And so far in my 30 plus years now of dyno testing, I have never seen a camshaft that only did better specifically with a tunnel ram. Same thing with turbos or blowers or nitrous. I've never seen a cam only work with that and not improve power NA. It's the same thing. It's the same relationship. If you take a camshaft and then you take another camshaft and that second camshaft made it better, it's going to make it better whether you have a dual plane on there, a single plane, a dual quad, an IR. It doesn't matter. It's going to make all of those better because it's just a more powerful camshaft. That's why I don't think that there is really such thing as a tunnel ram specific camshaft. Now we need to talk about what kind of camshaft I think would be better with a tunnel ram. And so the camshaft, as we saw in the videos that I did recently, a good example is the Summit cam that we just did on the LS. We could do this on a small block Chevy or whatever, but if we look at the LS, we ran two different camshafts. And one was the big nasty cam, and which was neither big. The idle quality is a little bit on the rougher, sketchy side. But the big nasty cam versus their bigger cam, their 8711. So essentially, we have like what do we have here? A 220 cam versus or a 230 cam, 234 cam versus a 218 cam. One of those is definitely going to be bigger than the other one. So there's almost nothing that you can do with all of the other valve events there to make that 234 cam smaller than the 218 cam. So we know right off the bat that one of those is going to be bigger than the other, and it's going to make more power. And that's exactly what happened. Those cams are, you would want to say, those cams are designed to run to optimize power production in a different RPM range. So if your tunnel ram, like in the case of this test that I did with these LS cams, we put a short runner intake manifold with the high RPM, long duration camshaft, and it made lots of peak power at the very top. If we were to do that with our tunnel ram combination, whether it's a big block or a small block, and that tunnel ram wanted to run, was optimized to run in a given power range, and we gave it a camshaft that was designed not to sign off at 4,500 RPM, something that was designed to sign off at 8,000 RPM or 7,500 or 7,000, wherever the rest of the things are going to want us to run, then that's going to be a good combination. But again, that camshaft doesn't know that it's providing its valve events to a tunnel ram. And the tunnel ram doesn't know what that camshaft is, other than, hey, look, I kind of want to make power based on my runner length. I want to make power in this given range. And if you then give me a cam to make power in that given range, that's kind of what's going to happen. The intake manifold is in charge of that much more than the camshaft is. And I know that a lot of cam guys are going to go nuts about that, but you saw in the test where we ran a very short runner intake manifold. In this case, it was a Holley low ram with the 238, 242 cam, and it made peak power at 75 or 7,600. And then we ran it with a truck manifold, and to make peak power 1,000 or 11 or 1,200 RPM earlier. And then we put a small cam in it. We put that 218 camshaft in it, still made peak power at like 65 or 6,600. So the intake has much more to do with controlling the effective RPM range than the camshaft does. But things go much better if you have both of those working together. And then in the case of the LS and in the case of our tunnel ram combination, if we're running a big block or small block, whatever, if you also have cylinder head that will support power production at that engine speed, especially the desired power output. We've talked about that many times. If you take a cylinder head and, hey, look, we've got a tunnel ram on it, we've got a big cam, we've got enough compression, and we are choosing a cylinder head or putting a cylinder head on there, and this combination, given its displacement, wants to make 600 horsepower, then you better make sure that you have cylinder heads that can support that 600 horsepower. If you have cylinder heads that are only going to support 500 horsepower, your combination is not going to do very well. By contrast, if you have cylinder heads that will support 700 or 800 horsepower, your combination is going to do really well. Even if your goal was only 600, it's still going to do well. And no, it's probably not going to lose a ton of power down low. So that's very important. Get the intake manifold, tuned with the camshaft, but it has less to do with the fact that it's a tunnel ram specifically, and more to do with what RPM range that thing's going to work at. Now, that being said, a lot of guys think that tunnel rams are super high RPM kind of things, and they're not. In a lot of cases, they're not. Actually, they work. Given their runner length, you look at a high ram and a single plane, you think that those are kind of the same thing. But a lot of times the tunnel ram will make more power than the single plane, almost all the way up to the peak. So it'll make a lot more average power, one, because it has, hopefully, if the design is correct, it has 8 runners that are all the same length, and not, unlike a single plane, 4 longs and 4 shorts, which doesn't tend to do as well. And especially if really that single plane manifold would work best if it had all of those long runners, which is what a tunnel ram really is. So there's lots of things to think about. But in the case of the tunnel ram, just like we talk about with a blower, roots blower, centrifugal blower, all these things, or turbos or whatever, if you have a cam and it works pretty well naturally aspirated on your combination, and in this case with whatever intake manifold you're using, it's going to work okay with the tunnel ram. And in my opinion, unless somebody shows me otherwise, some kind of test where they ran something and it didn't work with a single plane intake manifold. Somehow it didn't make more power with a single plane intake manifold, but did make more with a tunnel ram. And they did a back-to-back test. And this is always the problem with people, is they a lot of times I get examples of, well, we put together this combination, it did this, so therefore it must be good. I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. That combination did well. But did you try anything else on that combination to do a test to then verify the statement that you're trying to make? Oh, this camshaft works great with tunnel rams. Okay, it looks like it does, but you really don't know how well it works because you didn't compare it to anything else. Same thing with tunnel ram. Well, when you tested your tunnel ram cam and it worked well, and this must be a tunnel ram cam, did you try it with a single plate intake manifold or a dual plate intake manifold and see that it also does well with those? Almost every time the answer is no, we didn't do that. And so we're getting data that's not really data. It's a one run kind of thing. And I almost go tell them, hey, look, that's fantastic. That's a good combination. Sounds like you're making good power, but it's not the same thing as comparing something directly back to back. You can't say that you're doing that and give your reasoning and give your dyno data if you don't have that. If you don't have a comparison, then it's not a comparison. All it is, hey, we put a motor on the dyno and we ran it, and here's what happened. Also good stuff, and I'm definitely all in on listening to it, but that's what that is. And then a test is something else. It's completely something different. Taking a motor, putting on the dyno and running it is what we call a baseline. And then to someone who does testing, to someone who does back-to-back testing, that's a baseline. Now we change something and go, okay, if you did this and then changed it to this, then this happens. And it's the same thing with these tunnel ram intake manifolds. If you put a camshaft in it, it makes more power with the tunnel ram. If you got to ask yourself, would it have made more power if I would have had a single plane on there? The answer more often than not is probably yes. Let's see what our poll is doing. Is there really a tunnel ram cam? 72% are saying no. So that's definitely a majority. So we'll see what you guys got going on Sunday night. Did you guys watch? Are you guys football guys? Did you guys watch any of the football games? What's the biggest turbo I can put on a 5.3? Is that I'm sure that's not supposed to be camera. I'm thinking that that's supposed to be Camaro, maybe. Or maybe cam only or something. It's not the biggest turbo. That shouldn't be your question. The question should be, how much power do you want to make? And then the question is, how do I achieve that? And we can help you do that if you tell us what kind of power you want to make. You can put whatever size turbo you want on a 5.3. You can put 2 of them or 5 of them or 10 of them. It's not going to work, but you can put them on there. What size E85 injectors for a 5.3? That totally depends on what your desired power output is. You need something that's like 1500 cc's if you're going into the 4-digit range with E85. More tunnel rams, more modular tunnel rams. There we go. Building a 540 big block, and I have an L-block TRX, a TR2X. I'm here to learn, teach me, master. Well, hopefully I did. I just pick a camshaft that works well. It should have enough in lift and duration to take advantage of the breathing capacity of the tunnel ram. The best cam for a tunnel ram is the one that the owner of the motor is happiest with. Exactly. Can you make more power using Holley Terminator versus using a stock computer? If both are tuned perfectly, that is, will one make more power than the other? No. If your motor wants to run best, let's say you have an NA53 and the motor wants to run best at 29 degrees of total timing and wants to run best at 12.8 to 1 air fuel, and both of those computers will give the combination that, they will make identical power. The only thing that might restrict power a little bit on a factory computer is the use of a mass air meter. If your factory, I don't know what factory ECU or engine family you're talking about, but the factory ECU, if it's running a mass air meter, oftentimes the mass air meter can be restrictive. Tunnel rams have long runners, good for mid-range torque production, a cam that's grounded for lower mid RPM performance as opposed to high max RPM performance. There are different tunnel rams with different runner lengths designed for different RPMs. So again, all tunnel rams, any more than all single planes or all dual planes, are not the same. kind of guy who runs tunnel rams will 100% only settle the end of the page cam. No way he'll be running something mild. Actually, if you were building a cars and coffee cruiser kind of car, or a car that you're running on power tour or something, a mild cam tunnel ram thing looks really cool and actually would drive fairly well. The Terminator X will have powers that will help, but peak power can be had with a stock computer. Okay. Zoo Truck. What about those cams? What cams are you talking about? Probably not Truck Norris, as he will likely want to stall and a bigger cam. Will said certain intake will do its thing no matter what the cam is. It will try. I mean, an intake manifold has an effective RPM range, and it's hard to get away from that. The only thing you're doing is starting and stopping the intake valve opening, which determines the reflected wave, the initiation of the reflected wave, but it's not dramatic, as we saw. If we look at the 218 cam and the 234 cam, which is a pretty big difference, we see them with the truck manifold making peak power, and we had ported heads on it too. If anything, you think would favor the bigger camshaft, but they still both made peak power within 100 or 200 RPM of each other. Turbo Sentra, I didn't get to work on the engine today. I did get all the parts, maybe next week, and good. Do we need a tunnel ram? Well, do we need boost? Do we need a tunnel ram? All that's the same. A turbo would be better than a tunnel ram. And a camera to see in front of you over your tunnel ram, especially if you have a big hood scoop on it. Anyone get a single 4-barrel to work on a tunnel ram? The guys at Engine Masters did. Brule ran one. They ran one at West Tech on a small block Chevy. And I was wondering, because they had it there and I saw it, and I'm like, Steve, because we'd tried other the sheet metal ones, like Sniper ones and stuff, and they didn't work very well. But the one that they had, I guess, actually worked fairly well. I was surprised. Richard, happy belated. Tell me about I haven't had a birthday recently, so that's not me. Tell me about the 3.9 Ford V8 and the 4.2 liter V6. Is one more reliable or stronger? And replacing a GM module too much for a keyboard mechanic to tackle? Which 3.9 liter Ford V8 are you talking about? Are you talking about the one that they used in the Jaguars? Turbo tunnel ram can. That would be all of it, right? Just for understanding, I have 799 on a 5.7 and 862s on the dead 4.8. Chamber size can be affected by valve size, correct? The valve, not valve size so much. Those two, a 799 and 862, definitely have different chambers already, but it has nothing to do with the valve size. 799 has bigger valves. And if you have a bigger valve that has a flat face, then you can change the compression. But I don't think either one of those either one of the factory valves have that. To make a good performing vehicle, intake, cam, heads, torque converter all need to work together toward a particular goal. And just lean on one major part to build. And I don't know how the rest of it goes. 10 turbos, M5 fuel. I fixed a pipe about a foot away from the city main cutoff valve yesterday. Shoddy workmanship by the city when they changed the valve. I would recommend a horsepower goal level your transmission and rear end can handle. That's definitely a consideration, as making the power is very easy normally. Getting it, hooked up and planted and all that is different. Turbo Century, you guys got some freezing rain. That's not good. More salvage yard inventory because people are out crashing on the ice. What's the highest compression 5.3 on pump gas you've ever seen? I don't ever remember seeing that particular metric. The one that we have now on the L33 that we have is a flat top 5.3 with a 30 thousandths mil trick flow head on it, but it's probably not even as low as an L33 with the 706 head on it. So I don't know how high the compression is. Trying to run the most compression on pump gas is not a good idea. You run the LS PCV system on the dyno. You mean with the factory air intake and all that stuff? The answer to that's no. We don't normally run the factory PCV system. We have the valve covers vented to atmosphere. Finished my tunnel doghouse on the RAV 4.8. Looking at it, I could flip the intake, make a huge air intake in place of the sunroof. Cold air ram air. There you go. Someone needs to make a cam purely meant to be the most obnoxiously loud cam in existence and call the NVH cam. So you want it to be loud at wide open throttle, or do you want it to be loud at idle? Like, is it a chop cam or louder with like lots of exhaust duration when it's running at wide open throttle? And the pump gas question is, we get E85 from the pump. So technically that is pump gas too. And also California is 91 stuff, and other places in the United States are 93. So it'd make a difference where you're getting your pump gas from. And what you would want to do if you, for whatever reason, want to run a lot of compression. I myself don't really like dome pistons and stuff. I would rather have the head have a small chamber and have a flat top piston or a very slight dome. And then you'd want to soften the chamber so you could minimize detonation. There would be lots of stuff you could do if that was your goal. But I can only ever see wanting to do that for some sort of class where there would be restrictions where that would be necessary. Single carb on a tunnel ram looks cheap. Yeah, but the tunnel ram still works as long as you can get distribution to it. Big tall adapters work sort of under a 4-barrel. Yeah, and what they try to do on the single 4 tunnel ram stuff is where the carburetor comes down, you want to try to taper the lid out to all 4, rather than have it come straight down into a fairly tight necked log in there. Some of the older tunnel rams were like that. Jag Lincoln T-Bird 3.9 liter V8. I've never run one on anything. The one thing I can say comparing the similar size V8 and a V6 is V6 heads would have to flow a lot more to make the power that the same displacement V8 does, because it has more cylinder heads. It has more ports. So it can flow relatively less because it has to feed less airflow per cylinder to make a given power output. Keep thinking about modding a small block Chevy Ego intake to get around the 95 LT1 OptiSpark. I have the option to pick up a near mint F-150 with a 4.2 liter V6 that needs a GEM module. Is that a walkaway problem? I don't know. Does anybody have any experience with a 4.2 V6 and a module problem? We got dual thermal quads to work well on a tunnel ram street build. Cool. I don't know why you couldn't put almost any carburetors on a tunnel ram. VCT, VVT allows a lot more compression. Is there an engine that you like, that you hear, you feel like a kid again, or maybe zoomies or boost or anything specific that makes you especially happy? The seeing 1970 and a half split bumper Z28s does that. Not even Z28s, just any kind of Camaro, because mine wasn't a Z28, it was just a rally sport. How about a 3800 supercharger setup handle nitrous? I have a video up where we ran nitrous on it. It works fine. I see all your horsepower on the channel. Do you ever consider using nitrous? I have, I don't know, 30 or 40 videos up on the channel where we've run nitrous. I've run nitrous on a lot of stuff. In fact, almost every combination that we put up there, we run nitrous on, including that supercharged 3800. That video's up. Richard, it needs to be as loud as possible across all the rev ranges. Why is the 274 cam one of your favorite cams for the 351 Windsor? It is a good middle ground combination of drivability and performance. And it has a sentimental thing for me too, because it's way back. It's one of the first cams that I tested where I started thinking that the camshaft was not really a dedicated thing, where we could run this camshaft with NA, we could run it with nitrous, which I did. We could run it with a turbo, which I did. We could run it with a Vortex supercharger, which I did. We could run it with a Kenny Bell supercharger, which I did. We could run it with anything. And it was the cam that way back, I mean, this is 30 years ago or something, that kind of opened my eyes about all of this camshaft stuff. And so plus it works fairly well. I don't think it's the best cam out there. But I've tested it so often on so many different things, I do know what it will do. And so I can tell people, hey, look, if you want to do that sort of power level, this will get you there. Is that what causes two engines to be different volumes? Exhaust duration can have a big effect on exhaust note. So can the exhaust style too, X pipes and things. Have you watched Eric's YouTube all about the intakes he tested? What about the one adjusting the intake gasket? He gained 9 to 12 horsepower. I don't think that I must not have seen that. I don't recall the intake gasket thing. On a cam over bucket, would 10,000 valve lash be too tight? Book calls for 12. It's drag only. No, because the lash is probably going to increase. But I mean, couldn't you take 2,000s out of it? 12 seems like a lot. Let's see. What's the best way to achieve power for an LY6 6-liter with 200,000 miles tunnel ram? No, I don't recommend that. But I have lots and lots of LY6 videos up, because that was eventually the motor that I ran on as the Big Bang motor, where we made over 1,500 horsepower with turbos. But on that motor, we have lots of different cylinder heads that I ran, lots of different intake manifolds, lots of different camshafts. On any 6-liter, or on any LS motor, the single biggest thing you can do to add power is the first thing you do is cam and springs. And on an LY6, you already have really good cylinder heads and you already have a really good intake manifold. So you can go a long way by putting a camshaft in that thing. Have you tested carbs on a tunnel ram that are staggered, where one has a spacer, let's say 1 inch under it, and the other does not? How would that affect distribution across the 8 cylinders? So are you wanting to put a carb spacer under just one of the carburetors? I know I haven't done that test. Would that load half the motor differently, where one has a spacer? No, because if you look at what a carb spacer does, it a lot of times it doesn't affect the power curve at all. So it might be exactly the same. Sometimes it affects it a little bit, sometimes at one end of the RPM range and sometimes the other. And so you'd only be doing it to, I mean, let's say that it worked out exactly, and that you'd only be doing it to 4 of the cylinders. So the gain would even be minimized more with that. Richard, I asked this question a year ago. Would you please send me one of your mid or high ram LS intakes? Would I send you one of my intake manifolds? Well, I don't understand the question. With the amount of money people spend to make their exhaust louder, saying louder is always better. Yeah. The dual quads on tunnel ram need to be mechanical secondary. We always do that. I don't think I've ever tried to run 2 vacuum secondary carburetors. The signal would be reduced even more with dual carburetors unless you made them fairly small. Richard, that Z28 is a legendary car, one of the coolest out there. Yeah, the 69 gets kind of all the love. And it is, they are amazing looking. I love a 69 Z28, but my first car was a 70. So, and it is, it's a better car. It handles better, it brakes better, it does everything better than a 69. So that's kind of, that's just the one that I like. But the car that I want to get actually is a Chevelle. The next car I buy after the Metro, the next big purchase car that I get would be a 70, 71, 72 Chevelle. We were watching, I think we were watching one of the Fast and Furious movies last night, and we even turned it off because it was terrible. But and I'm all in on that kind of stuff, anyways. But they had some sort of Chevelle SS, and we were looking at, my wife's like, "Ooh, I like those cars. I like that car." Had stripes on it. You still own a Mustang? Yes, I'm an original owner, 88 5-liter LX. 400 small block versus 396 big block. Who you got for all out NA power? Well, if you're forced to run stock heads, a 396 big block makes a lot more power than a 400 does. It just doesn't have cylinder head to do that. And then if you go up to an absolute thing, a 396 big block makes more power because it has way more aftermarket cylinder head available than a 400 small block does. Uh, 274 Iski. I don't know what that question is. The 274 cam that he was talking about is an Extreme Energy 274 comp cam. But there's lots of others that are like that. Crane. In fact, the first one that I put in my car was not a comp cam. It was a Crane. The one that I ran most of the time was the Crane version of that cam. And I'm sure comp, I'd have to go back and look, but comp may have come up with it after that. My snarky answer to the poll: a tunnel around specific cam is any cam for the matching RPM range. Yeah. So Special Agent, did you just get here? Did you hear the discussion at the beginning? 12 was very noisy for a few minutes. Yeah, I remember the Honda stuff as being like 6, so it was a lot tighter than that. Yeah, louder cars tend to definitely garner attention from the wrong sort. If boosted, would there be any downside to running a longer runner intake and tossing an extra 1 pound of boost up top versus shorter runners? With 1 less PSI up top, better overall curve. Yeah, I guess. I don't know what you're trying to achieve, but normally what happens is you choose the runner length for your intended RPM range. You don't take and run a short runner intake or a long runner intake and try to run to 8,000. That's a waste of time. If you're going to run up there, then you need to have an intake manifold that's going to want to run up there. Even boosted, it doesn't make any difference. You can fudge that a little bit with a rising boost curve. But the benefit to having the longer runner is not just at the top, it's actually at the bottom. Especially the bigger the turbo that you put on there, the more that becomes a consideration. Because the bigger the turbo is, the more you need low speed response, or it could be mid-range response depending on your stall converter and stuff. But the more power that you have down low, the more you'll be able to get that turbo spooled up. And that's way more important for 90% of the people 90% of the time, because guys are out enjoying it and they want the thing to go when they step on the gas. And the fact that it makes extra power at 8,000 RPM, unless you have a 5,000 stall and you're running at the track only, where you're using that and putting that to good use, hopefully. But for most people, it's like street stuff, you want more power down low, longer runners, milder cams, smaller turbos, because you'll enjoy it a lot more. Is there anything I can do to replace an electric carb on my 3.9 Dodge to a normal carb? You can, but the problem is it's computer controlled, so you have a problem there. Can you get a 500 CFM head with a big block Chevy? Yeah, there are big block Chevy cylinder heads that flow 500 CFM. Comp rates at 6,000, crane at 4. Their 274 would not be the same. Their 274, the 274 cams, those specs that I had were identical. Richard, have you ever tested 18, 15, or 13 degree small block Chevy heads? Why do they flow more than 23 degree heads? Have you seen what that angle change does? Have you flowed any of the, like an 18 degree head not long ago was a Chevy race head. Now they have probably 11 degree stuff. As you move that valve angle over, the flow rate does go up. Would you be able to see a comparison of the Summit Big Nasty versus Sloppy Stage 2, Truck Norris, and maybe something between the two? I don't have those cams tested on the same combination. I have the Big Nasty versus the Sloppy Stage 2, but the Truck Norris wasn't run on this same motor. The next video I'm doing is actually a comparison between a couple of different cams. One is the Big Nasty cam versus the Sloppy Stage 1.5, because those two are much more direct competitors. One of them's a 218 cam, one of them's a 220. A Sloppy Stage 2 would be a 228 cam. That would be a bigger cam. It's just going to make more peak power than I think either one of those. And then also a comparison between the Summit 8711 R1 camshaft and the Sloppy Stage 3, which one of them is a 234 and the other one is a 238. And I'm giving you, in this time, I'm giving you all the specs, including overlap, intake open, intake close, all LSA, all of these things. So you guys can look at that. And then also that 8711 R1 cam versus, which is their Stage 4 cam versus the BTR Stage 4, because I ran all of those, or each sets of two of those on the identical combination. So it should be good stuff. Turbo Center, you get some sleep, man. What's the rule of thumb of putting a cam swap in a high mileage engine? Would you have to replace other components? When you put a camshaft in an LS, almost always you replace the springs. There were some tests where I did, I can't remember if I did it. I think I did it on the 4.8. We put the Truck Norris NSR cam, which is designed to run, because it's a low lift cam, designed to run with stock springs. I don't recommend that, but we could do it, and we did do it, and it worked. Otherwise, when you do a cam swap, you do a cam and springs. When you're taking the thing apart to do that, then look at the things and see what you have to replace. You might have to put a different front cover seal on it, or the crank seal. I don't normally replace the other things. We reuse the lifters and all that when I do cam swaps. This L33 is a perfect example. It has hundreds and hundreds of runs on it, and we didn't replace any of that stuff. It still has the original lifters in it, and this thing goes to 7,700. It has 100 runs, I'm sure, up there, but we haven't replaced any of that stuff. Just recently, in this last go around, I replaced the gasket, the Valley gasket. I think it still has the original rear cover gasket, and still has the original front cover gasket. And the front cover gasket I'm less concerned about, because I take it on and off so many times that I really don't want to put a new one on there until it goes together for the final time. But the Valley cover was leaking, and oil was getting up and dripping off and stuff, so we don't want to do that. And then when I replaced the valve covers, from the valve covers that are just used old wrecking yard valve covers with a breather on them, I put the Brian Tooley Racing valve covers on, which now I love. They have AN fittings on them with big hoses on them, which go to the back with just open breathers, basically. And those have new valve cover gaskets. What driveline would you put in your upcoming Chevelle? I'm hoping that the Chevelle already has a driveline, But all I want actually is I don't care if it has an LS in it. That would be fine. I'd kind of like it to be an automatic, but I would take a stick too. A big block Chevelle would be ideal, like a LS6 or something like that. But honestly, I would rather have than that. I'd like to have one. If I had a big block, I'd like to have one that looks like an LS6, but is not, but is an aluminum headed, like a 540 or something, but with a milder cam in it so that it's drivable. Because this is a car that I just want to take my wife out in. What's the point in high lift, short duration cams? Seems pointless because there's hardly any power gain and you need stiffer springs. What's the point in high lift, short duration cams? I don't know. Some guys want to just add lift to see if that gains any low speed power. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's a lot like putting a different rocker ratio on that stuff. But you're right that as you go up in lift and don't go up in duration, the ramp rate gets pretty aggressive and oftentimes unstable. BDS makes a pretty nice tunnel ram. Their blower. Freiberger ran the tunnel ram with the blower, and obviously, as we've seen, intake manifolds do the same thing, NA and under boost. And so when you put a blower on top of a tunnel ram, it makes more power than it does when you put the blower on top of the short runner blower manifold because it has more runner. Timing chain and gear, maybe oil pump, water pump. Yeah, I don't change any of those. We run the motor stock, and if it's still running and it has good oil pressure and stuff, all of that stuff stays together. Charles, that lifters, if it's a DOD AFM, yeah, if it has that stuff, we would replace that stuff. I haven't gotten any. I've only gotten one of those motors, and we did a DOD how-to kind of thing on that. Why would you want an automatic? It's easier to drive back and forth to where we're going. But like I said, I would take a stick too. Tunnel ram mafia. Yep. Is it really a tunnel ram specific cam? 77% are saying no. I don't think so. I'd like for somebody that knows way more about camshafts than me to try to convince me that that's the case. Given all of my data, they're going to be hard pressed to do that. Not that I think the way that I think is absolute, but it would be hard for them to, to get me going down another path, given all the things I've tested. When you do a cam swapping on LS, you always need to replace the NA with turbo. the NA cam with the turbo cam. You already have a turbo cam. Doesn't matter what cam you have in there. When I put a blower on top of a tunnel ram, we backfire it into pieces. Use a blow off valve and brace it. Why did you have a backfire? Oh, just a joke about boosting it. That's the cam swap you need is boost. Just love the sound of my M22 in first and second and third gear. Oh, for a manual trans thing, yeah. Short runner to longer intakes. The only changes that you're going to be making, if that's all you change, is your intake in your fuel management system. You're going to have to tune it differently. If you change, are you asking, Scott, if you change an intake manifold from a short runner to a long runner, are you going to have to retune it? Is that your question? If that is your question, yeah, you're going to have to add fuel. If you go from a short runner to a long runner manifold, you're going to have to add fuel in the range where the long runner manifold is going to be making more power than the short runner, and then you'll have to take fuel away at some high RPM point if you're still revving out there, where the short runner manifold makes more than the long runner manifold. Tunnel rams look epic. That's why I'm going to run the TR2X on my 540 to match the cool intake. Is there anything wrong with running big header primaries like 2 1/4 versus 1 7/8? No, I think the headers on I think the minimum size header that we have is 2 1/8 for the big block stuff, and I think they normally run 2 1/4. think they had a crossfire on the ignition system. Yeah, backfires are not good. We had one on the we had a couple actually when I was running the carburetor on the M90 supercharger. I don't think it happened on the carburetor going into the backside of the M90, but when the one that I had on top, when we would shut it off and then go to restart it, sometimes there would be a little bit of backfire. There's a lot of fuel inside that blower in various places because it was puddling inside there, and because it was never designed to have fuel in there. Is it difficult to modify a Holley 4777 to accept boost as a blow through? I've never built my own blow through carburetor. Is a tunnel ram basically the same as a high ram? Well, a high ram is a tunnel ram style manifold. So they're the same thing. If you just put a lid on it and put the lid on it that has two 4-barrel carburetors, that is a tunnel ram. 30 years of driving manual transmissions, mostly because I couldn't afford the automatic, and GSXRs don't come in automatic. I know mine didn't. I'm tired of manual, plus no one rebuilds them. It's a lot easier to drive a manual in traffic, but that kind of car, that like a Chevelle or whatever, it's just never going to see traffic. It's just going to be driven from here down to the bar. But that being said, all of the cars that I've had, other than this truck, I think, have all been manual transmissions. In fact, when I'm looking at that's actually a deal breaker. When I was looking for cars to put this AMR 500 on, so looking at Hondas and Sentras and F510s, although those are way out of my price range, RX-7s, whatever, anything. Oh, I saw an RX-7 in there that I wanted that was reasonably priced. If it says automatic transmission, that's a deal breaker. I wouldn't get any of those. I don't like the smaller cars with automatics. Ryan, here's my 2 cents. There's no specific cam for tunnel ram, but there's definitely cams that may not be optimal. Well, and we talked about this at the beginning. In the same way that there are cams that are not optimal for whatever that combination is, and the problem being that your optimal might be different than mine and different than everybody else's here. There's no, optimal. There's no. That's the discussion I have with the tight LSA guys. I'm like, look, what do you think is best? Because you don't have a cam. You can't adjust lobe separation angle and have it make more power at 7,500 if that's what a guy wants. That's not going to work. Wilson Manifolds posted a picture of their Wilson Spacer on the carbureted M90, and all the comments were, yeah. I actually responded to a post that Wilson made and posted that, and said that I was putting their spacers to good use. I commented on one of their posts that they did. I know Keith. He's a really good guy. I've talked to him a few times. We get together when West Tech used to have dinners out at Vegas for the SEMA show and invite all the people there. And Keith was one of the guys. So I was like talking to him because he's Keith Wilson. He's a really sharp guy, and he's really nice. I talked you into the RX-7. I do want that. I just can't get a Metro and an RX-7 and have a bunch of. I don't even have room for my truck. Behold my magnificent blower. Tight LSA is the best. I noticed the manual cars mile per hour more, but ET slower in the quarter with all things being equal. If you look at a drag race of a Coyote, I'll bet you that the automatic car is faster, both faster and quicker. Are all big block Chevy heads mismatched intake port length? My TRX has 2 different runner diameters and I was told not to port it to make them match. It was cast that way because the big block Chevys have different sizes. There is kind of a long and short version of the, but I think people put way too much into that. When you do the clutch on the Metro, get a 1.3 flywheel and clutch assembly. So just get a stock replacement 1.3 Swift or something clutch assembly. MDO, mild cam, short runner versus wild cam, long runners. Will the curves be similar? I think you asked this question before, and I've never tested that specifically. Really easy for a customer to want too long of a cam for tunnel ram. Back in the day, there was no short runner tunnel ram manifolds. And Jim or GM, I'm thinking that's Jim. I'm not sure. But the problem compounds itself with a tunnel ram, especially if you're putting a tunnel ram on a 302 small block Chevy and you're putting a big cam in it. So getting the thing to be able to low speed tune and drive around becomes problematic, doubly problematic because you don't have as much of a signal from the small motor to the carburetors on your tunnel ram unless you're using really small ones. But nobody's going to put 2 barrels on there. They wouldn't do that. You could put the small 390 carburetors on there maybe, but you have a tunnel ram, you have 2 carburetors, you have a small motor, the signal's not great, and then you put too big of a camshaft in it and reduce the signal even more, and so it becomes runs okay at wide open throttle from 4,000 on out wherever you're running it from, but driving it around can be problematic. We had a guy in our town that had a Vega because his dad had a speed shop and he had a Vega. Oh no, his didn't have the tunnel ram on it. But he had a V8 Vega. That thing was really fast. But the one I'm thinking of, I think, was an El Camino, and he used to drive around with a tunnel ram. And I remember seeing him drive around in the rain with a tunnel ram. I'm like, dude, that's awesome. He's got like nature's water injection. Building an LQ9, wanting to run 823s with the BTR Stage 4, going to be a high RPM mud truck. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Those heads will make power. Now all you got to do is put the right intake on it. On topic of primary size, I saw you ran inch and 7/8 on the L33 on the big nasty test. Is inch and 7/8 on purpose, looking for more high-speed power, or just a little extra wouldn't hurt? In this case, I've tried inch and 3/4 and inch and 7/8, and a lot of times we don't see any difference. But Westech recently changed their dyno headers, the ones that they used that had 802s on it. So we ran those, and I noticed that the power curve didn't seem to be as good as the ones that I had run previously, which I think are American Racing inch and 7/8. But on those, I also had the collector extension and the muffler. So it made more power with the collector extension and the muffler. And I like running mufflers because there's no reason for me to make hundreds of runs and have it be really loud. I wear ear protection anyway, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any more power without the mufflers, and it takes a lot of the noise and aggravation away. So that's why we ran that combination, because it actually worked best. I had a Gen 6 454 L29. I put a comp cam 284 with a tunnel ram with 2 Holly 650s. Yeah, you could put that on there if you're doing it for looks. That combination is not going to really be able to take advantage of that. I mean, I don't know what tunnel ram you're putting on there. I assume it would be like a Wyand tunnel ram. It'd be fun to drive around. What's the closest you would run the intake valve to piston with your head gasket change? We've done 3,000s, but I don't recommend it. I was willing to, have the motor break. But we tried it and it was okay. Because what you have as a stationary measurement, you don't have dynamically. It's going to increase. I love the Metros, but I get the RX-7 if it's in equivalent condition. The Metro's rough. The RX-7 probably is in better shape. I'm sure I just have to get it running. I'd like to have an RX-7 anyway because I just think that they're cool, and I don't have any rotaries to run and do tests on. Had a turbo 350 that shifted like lightning. Nice, clean, no hard shifts on the built 400 small block and 83 Monte Carlo. We put a shift kit in. In fact, that was the first transmission modification I did. And when I say we did, my dad is really the one that did it. But I followed along, when I was young, putting a shift kit in, and it was the best transmission money we ever spent. Because back then I would think it was about $25 or something for the shift kit. And just a separator plate and, magic check balls and stuff. And when you put that in there, it would chirp second. So that's all. That's a win. Way too much, such as tri-power cams, take a lot of development to get right. Yeah. And the 1.3 flywheel, cheap upgrades. So are those things readily available at like the auto parts stores? Opinion on an L99 VVT, is it akin to VTEC or less aggressive, like a fuel saver function? Seems like a great way to get the best of both worlds, small and big cam. Actually, a VVT is not VTEC. They are dramatically different. One of them is just the VVT is just advancing, retarding the cam that you have. VVT is actually two distinct cam profiles, and it jumps from one cam profile to the other. So you have a very mild cam that drives around and idles and stuff, and then you have a big cam that makes lots of power. When you have a VVT cam, what you do is have either a really big cam that they're trying to tame down with VVT, which that's not the way the OEMs do it, or you have a mild cam that they're trying to extend the effective RPM range with by retarding the camshaft and making more power, a little more power on top. VVT from that standpoint doesn't have nearly the dynamic range that VTEC does and doesn't make nearly as much power, but it is beneficial. Yeah, and then now the VTEC for Honda guys, they have both. They have VTEC and VVT. So I just tuned in tonight, and Richard's looking for a car to fit a supercharger. That's the way it goes, right? If I have a supercharger sitting in my garage, there has to be something I could put it on. With long tube runners, you quit making more top end and lose your low end. Are you talking about exhaust? I hope you're not talking about intake manifolds. I ran a 3030 solid cam with my tunnel ram, 331. That's jumping Coke cans. But ran 538 gears, yep, with a 4-speed. And I hope you tight lash that solid cam too. I was reading that a wider intake to exhaust duration is preferred with 823 heads because the intake flows better than the exhaust. Mike, there's no such thing as a rec port cam. Just look at all the cams that I ran and just pick a cam for it. The cams do the same thing. I have a test where we ran a camshaft like you're talking about, one that has a wider split between intake and exhaust, one that has a narrower split between intake and exhaust. I ran that with rec port heads, and I ran that with cathedral port heads, and both the cams did the same thing with both heads. So that's what they do. So just pick a cam that does the thing that you want it to do. Can you put a 3-rotor in an RX-7? You might be able to, although I don't have 3-rotor kind of money. I don't even have used RX-7 kind of money. Okay, for a tunnel ram, wow factor, carbs hanging out of the hood, would you run open carbs or velocity stacks? Drivability difference? Yeah, velocity stacks might help, but again, you're sticking way up. Appreciate the input. Basing my motor build off your research. Have you run a test between an LS3 and I have run an NBSS intake manifold. I have run a test between the truck version of the rec port intake manifold, which comes on an LY6, and an LS3 manifold. And I've tested that many times, and they're exactly the same. So if you have the truck intake manifold and it fits under the hood, there's no reason for you to buy an LS3 manifold. They make the same power. Mike, what are you saying about a 2.2 intake? Scrolling. I didn't see what your comment was, except being around. Oh, here we go. I was reading that a wider intake exhaust duration is preferred. On a Corolla engine, 4-banger is double overhead cam, which has VVT, 1 gear on the intake, 1 on the exhaust, 2 phasers and actuators. So it has VVT both on the intake and the exhaust. That's good. So you're adjusting both of them. 2nd gen RX-7 can get 3 rotors to fit. Zoo Truck, happy to help. Rob Dom will show you how to get 3 rotors to fit. I mean, you could cut and hack anything you want. I wouldn't. If I was getting an RX-7, I wouldn't be worried about more rotors. An SB2 will fit. Yeah, definitely. Tall tunnel ram, you get to a point where more duration does not help. Unhappy customer, I ground a special order cam shorter. Did he have a long runner tunnel ram then? Got my last flywheel from AutoZone. My clutches from South Bend though. What is South Bend? Is that a place? Are you talking about South Bend, Indiana? Or are you talking about, is that the name of a shop or something? Velocity stacks on tunnel run, increase water injection in the rain. They definitely do that. You can get puddle up all the way, right? And hydrolock it. Someone wants an LS3 manifold, just get the LS2 Gen 4 truck. An LS2 is not the same as an LS3 manifold, that's for sure. In the winter, tunnel ram carbs will ice over if just sticking out of the hood, but that has been done. Pulled over many times, waited for it to melt, so I'd suggest a scoop. Has anyone ever built a Smoky Unit tribute engine using big block rockers and a Smoky Ram intake? Are you talking about a small block? How would you put big block rockers on a small block? The LS2 6-liter was in the Trailblazer SS. That's fine, except again, an LS2 intake is not a LS3 intake. Oh, South Bend Clutch Company. Okay. Smoky Ram intakes didn't work very well compared to anything modern, Dan. I think his point was that he just wants it to look like the Smoky Ram thing. NorCal Gym tunnel rams. Bring me back to the boat days. Very, very popular on boats. I mean, why wouldn't you have it on your boat? That's cool. Then you only have to worry about, like, cruising up to the marina and the dock. Otherwise, it's just all, open lake. And it's got to look cool. It's got to be like a polished tunnel ram and stuff with all the bling. Relocated the studs. Okay. I was going to say, it's the offset's definitely going to be different. I think I just put a different cam in it, not have to rely on a 1.7 rocker. TBS is a cathedral. Yeah, it is. An LS2 is cathedral and the LS3 is Recport. And so a Trailblazer SS or an LS2, both are cathedral. The V-Drive boat that we used to take out had a 482 with a 1071. That's probably good. Blowers on there are also good. And then you would have the blower on the tunnel ram. And then if you want to get really tall, then you have the blower and the intercooler and then the tunnel ram. Richard, would an H22 be comparable to a K20 performance-wise? No, unfortunately not. It doesn't have the cylinder head flow that a K20 does. Would a cam only Gen 6 454 make more power than a cam only 6-liter 6.2? No, actually not even close to either one of those. A cam only 454 with the kind of cam that you could put in it, we normally see 425 or something, 430. And maybe there's a better cam that you could do with that. But on a cam only 6-liter 6.2, you're looking at, like, if you do a cam only in an LS3, you're looking at 565 or 570. Can you please explain why regrinding a cam acts bigger? Stock regrinds act like performance cams. Actually, they have made it into a performance cam. So when you regrind the cam, what they've done is cut the base circle down, and they have reprofiled your lobes. So now your lobes are effectively bigger lobes. So you've made your, for instance, 200 duration cam now a 215 or 220 duration cam, and you've made your 480 lift cam a 500 or 520 lift by regrinding it. The difference now is, because you've reground it, you have to take up the distance that they've cut the cam down. So they've cut it down and then as I said, recut the lobes. but now you have to take and you have to address whatever change in base circle they made. So for like an LS cam, if you were to regrind that, or something that's not an overhead cam motor, you have to address that usually with longer push rods. If it's an overhead cam motor, you have to readjust that with, you have to shim lash adjusters, or you have to put either spacers or shims under buckets. You have to take up that amount so that the cam acts like it did before. It's just going to be a performance cam now. Can I run an LSA safely on a stock LY6 without ring gap? Are you going to run it at low boost and on good gas? Had oil in the top end and the bottom end, spun all bearings and welded them to the crank, and the oil filter was dry and clean like out of the box. Any idea what it might have gone wrong? The oil filter had no oil in it? You need to look and see. I don't know what motor this is. If it's an LS, you need to look and see if if there was a clog going in or around the filter area. Take a look at the barbell. I don't know how you would be able to bypass the maybe you could do that with no barbell, but there shouldn't be any oil pressure though. What's the longest runner small block Chevy intake that you can think of for a performance application? I don't know. Probably, are you looking to make low speed power? If you're looking to make low speed power, I think a dual plane would be the way to go. So it's not snake oil. No, regrinding cams is very, very common. It's done most often when with engine families that don't get a lot of love and don't have lots of aftermarket cams made for them. We could buy hundreds of different LS cams, but if you go try to buy a cam for a 3.9 liter Dodge or a 4.7 liter Dodge, there's probably not a lot to choose from. So we have to take that and regrind it and then make it into a performance cam and then adjust accordingly so that everything works. What compression ratio do you like for boosted LSs on the 85? I'm always doing junkyard motors, so I'm going to go ahead and close our poll out at 76% saying no, there's no tunnel ram specific cams. So I run whatever the stock compression ratio is. And when I put motors together, when I do big blocks and stuff, I normally put them around 10 for that stuff, because that way it'll make a decent amount of power NA, which I do a lot of NA testing. And then I can also run boost at that compression. 8 to 10 pounds. What type of gas should I run with an LSA? The problem is you're going to run into, if you're the one that was asking about it with no ring gap, you're going to want to turn the boost up and then you're going to break it. But most people want to run pump gas, and if your tuner is really good, you could probably get away with that. If you can run E85, it will make more power. What's a safe maximum RPM out of an LQ9? I don't know. Well, what is it? Tell me what is it you're trying to do? Just trying to stay out of the weather. Custom grinds or experimentations. That's what I told people, that your custom cam is just a cam that has not been tested and not become a shelf cam, because all the good custom cams become shelf cams. I'm the only one rocking a Mark IV. No, I have a Mark IV. I have one in my garage. Mark IV is what I've been running for 20 years in my dually. A cam is a tunnel ram cam as long as the intake valves are open at the time that allows the reflection through the runner to drive some air in there. Don't see how that could be specific. No, a cam is just effective in a given RPM range, just like the tunnel ram is. So if you match those two, and honestly, even if you don't, you want to run a tunnel ram and you want to run a mild truck cam in it, it works just fine. It just doesn't make all the power that it could. How much lift can a stock Magnum valve train handle? I don't know. I've never tried to max one out, and I don't know what the limitation is. We got 1 more minute. Green bass. What was your question? I thought regrinding can first involve adding material, then regrinding. It can be done that way. More often, though, is not. They don't weld them up and then regrind them, but that can be done, and it has been done like that too. Good rocker combo for a 4.3-liter Vortec. I don't know. What isn't stock a? Isn't that the same as a small block Chevy? Isn't that a 1.5? So you could put a 1.6 on there, or a 1.5 roller. Going to be in a mud truck. I want to rev past the power peak for the BTR stage 4 cam. So what is the rest of the combination? How high do you want it to rev? This 5.3, which has the same stroke as the 6-liter does. We've run hundreds of times to 7,600, and all that it has is it has good springs in it. It has stable cams in it. I have webcams cut my G10 cams from 198 duration 325 to 232 425. Are you serious? They were able, they must have welded those up, right? Because I've never seen reground cams get anywhere near that kind of change in lift or duration. Did they weld them up and regrind them? Can we win a day with Richard at West Tech? I don't think most people would want to spend the day that I do at West Tech. Most of the aftermarket Porsche cams are either welded regrinds or new cast iron cores. I mean, you could do billet stuff too, but that just gets expensive. I'm looking for 1,000 horsepower and 1,000 foot-pounds too. That's a lot, but it's not a lot under boost. Well, webcam welds the lobes up. Okay, good. I'd like to have a cam done for my Sprint turbo motor. What's the best option for a turbo drain on a 5.3? Think of doing timing cover with built-in fittings. There's no best. There's lots of things that will work. I've run them to the. You can run them to the block. You can run them to the oil pan. You can run them to the front cover. All of that works. What cars do you have? Well, the car that I run every day is a Silverado, but I also have a 240Z and a 5-liter Mustang, an Omni GLH. Seems like it takes forever to get things back from the machine shops. I just need to add rockers, front and rear seal, oil pan, valve covers. They welded them up, and it was it's very expensive. How expensive could it be to do a 3-cylinder camshaft? Gen 5, 502, block board and stroke to 540, 650-ish, but max effort, torque production, cruiser, not race build, stock GM heads or aftermarket heads for a mild build. What GM heads do you have? Iron heads on there now? I would definitely put, if it's a 502, it originally came with a GM head that they're calling a GM head, but it's made by Edelbrock, I believe. Silverado, that's right. The Porsche re-wheels are $1,000 a pair from webcams. Nice. I need to get into the Porsche cam business then, right? They have a guy in Tacoma that regrinds them about half the price of a performance cam. What application is for that? Is that for, Winston? Spent some time years ago watching dudes on YouTube weld cam lobes up for Briggs and Stratton 5 horsepower, reground with a bench grinder. Good stuff. Now the cams are plastic. Oh, that's kind of cool. I know, Dan. It's the Porsche tax. That might be a good business to start, though, right? I mean, it can't be very hard to make Porsche cams. Oh, so you're talking about doing performance or Gen 2 LT1, a cam for that? Makes me think a cam for small engine could be printed. Not sure about longevity. Yeah, I don't know what kind of material they would print it out of. It's going to depend on RPM and spring load, I think. And on that note, it is time to go. Everybody, hopefully you guys had a good weekend. I will be back tomorrow. I'm working on a couple of videos now, and we should see a good comparison between three pretty cool cams: the Sloppy Stage 3 and the 8711, the Stage 4 BTR and the Stage 4 Summit, and then the Sloppy Stage 1.5 and the Big Nasty Cam. That's all coming up.